Maybe it's this beautiful new Suhr Modern T I've got, maybe it's something in the air, or perhaps it's even all the copious amounts of corn liquor I've been drinking. But here lately, my East Tennessee has been showing and I've been enjoying playing some hot chicken fried licks. Just the other week there on Weekend Wank Shop 296, I showed you guys how to play Dann Huff's amazing solo from Summer's Comin' by Clint Black. And even more recently, you might have seen me playing a really fun countrified lick in the neighborhood of A over on Tyler Larson, aka Music Is Win's channel. He just put together like a 20-something player super licks video that I was a part of, which was really, really neat. And I played some redneck stuff on that. And since those two videos came out, I've had a lot of people sending me comments, questions, and telepathic messages about how to play country licks like that, and what are the scales, what are the shapes you need to know, and all that kind of thing. So I thought I'd give you guys a quick video today where I show you all how to play the lick that I played in Tyler's video, as well as explain kind of the thought process, scale patterns, shapes, and stuff like that that I use whenever I'm playing chicken fried stuff. Downloadable tabs and charts for this lesson can be found over on the coolest place on the entire internet, patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. And even for just $1 a month, you get access to a ton of backing tracks, bonus lessons, and so much more. So be sure to click the Patreon link in the video description below, sign up for that Patreon page today, and start reaping the benefits. Gear-wise today, I'm playing my Suhr Modern T, which I'm totally nuts about. I've got that plugged into the Suhr Woodshed compressor pedal and into the Axe FX 3. First, I'll show you guys how to play the lick, and then we'll talk about some of the scales and shapes that you need to know to start sounding more rednecker. Here's the lick. Yeah, let's hear that again at step-dad speed. Okay, so the lick starts off here on the high E string. We're gonna slide into the third of the chord, then go down to the root, before we go here to the second string, then back to the root, okay? So notice right there that after I left the high E string and went to the B, I didn't make my pick return to play the high E string again. I used the middle finger on my right arm hand. Now, that's a really common thing to see in country licks like this. You'll see that happen again in the next part of the lick. This is kind of like a blues scale sort of thing, so it feels pretty familiar to a lot of you guys. Starting off here with a pull off on the B, go into the G string, there's that little blues scale note, the flat 5, and then I'm gonna go back to the B with my middle finger, not with the pick. After that, I'm just going down the scale here on the G string. Boom, boom, pull off, then your root note. So now you got this. Here's the next part of the lick. Okay, this is really essential redneck shit happening right here. Again, we'll talk about the theory and harmony here in just a second too. You can see it's starting off with a little roll under my third finger, then going back to the G for this little hammer-on. After this, again, there's that hybrid picking principle again. After I reach the A, I'm not going back to the D with my pick, I'm gonna do it with my middle finger instead. After this, we got this little 3-note chromatic walk down, again, reminiscent of the blues scale. Notice the open A string there at the end. That's useful for two reasons. For one, it's the root note of the chord, sounds good, but also by using an open string, it gives our hand time to shift down a step so we can play this. Little double stop here at the end. You can see I'm starting off here with my third and fourth fingers on the A and D strings. Then we're gonna use my third finger here to come up here and play the root before I play this. Kind of feels like I'm playing a C power chord where I do a hammer on in front of the root note. After that, play the root here at the bottom, and you're good to go. So the whole thing is this. But what is it that makes country licks like that tick? And what makes them sound so chicken fried and fun, right? Well, in order to understand that, it's better if you learn a little bit about the kind of harmony and stuff that these sort of players lean into, rather than just me prescribing you a scale pattern or whatever to learn. I'll show you a really useful shape that I use all the time, but you gotta understand why we're using it to get the most out of it. Now, I mentioned earlier that that's kind of played over like an A major sort of sound, right? But usually what country guys do whenever they see a major chord is they do this thing where they imply through their lead playing that it's actually a dominant chord. You can call these dominant chords, you can call them sevens, you can call them dominant sevens. Just don't call them late for dinner. Now, the only thing about these chords that you got to understand is that it's just like a major chord. Here's our A major grip. Only we include this magical interval called a flat 7. Now, you don't have to know a ton about theory to understand what that is. All you got to know is that for wherever you have a root note, for example, here's a high A root note, you can find the flat 7 a whole step behind that note. So not a half step, but a whole step behind. And as soon as you add that flat 7 interval in, stuff starts sounding funky. You could also take your A grip that you have right here and go, well, there's a root note A here on the 3rd string, right? So if I lower that down a whole step, now I have an A7. So whenever country players see a major chord, they want to make it sound like it's a dominant chord most of the time. I'm not going to say 100% of the time. But most of the time when you see major, you're actually thinking dominant, okay? And country players are absolutely dynamite about outlining chord tones within their playing. They're actually not all that scalar when they play. They're really just thinking about what's in the chord, how can I express that, as well as fill in the gaps between the notes and use some chromaticism and stuff like that. So whenever we're playing over this A, which we're hearing as A7, we need something to use as a starting point that has all the notes that are in it, as well as some cool melodic twists. This 2-note per string shape is one that I learned a long time ago that I lean into a lot for my country playing. It's not too hard to play, and you'll hear right away it outlines the sound of that A7 chord really nicely. Check this out. Again, it really just sounds like that chord, even when you just play up and down it like that. Now, intervallically, what's going on here is really important because you're going to find that it has all the notes that are in the chord. This pattern that I use here starts off on the flat 7. So again, there's the root note A. Flat 7 goes a whole step below it, right? Flat 7, root, 3rd, 5th. Now that right there is everything that's in the chord already. So you've established a good melodic base right out of the gate when you use that shape. The next part here is that flat 7 again. There's the root again. Again, wherever there's a root, there's a flat 7 a whole step behind it. On the G string right here, we have the 3rd, followed by the 4th, or 11th. But who's counting, really? Well, Adam Neely subscribers are counting, like myself, so I am also counting this with you, Adam Neely fans. After that, 5th, flat 7th, root, and 3rd. So in a way, you could say it's kind of like an A11 arpeggio with no 9th. You could say it's like a Mixolydian scale with some holes punched in it. Whatever you want to call it, it just sounds right. And again, the configuration of 2 notes per string makes it pretty easy to pick through and come up with cool, familiar licks that'll even remind you of some of your favorite minor pentatonic licks that you probably know. Now this shape right here is one that I use all the time, and I augment it with a very important country fundamental. This is something you got to know if you want to make your licks country strong, because there's something that country players do within these major and dominant sounds that doesn't really make much sense from like a theory standpoint, but it's just part of the vocabulary. I kind of compare this to how in the South we say a lot of things in our vocabulary that don't make sense. Like, I ain't not. Ain't not. That's a double negative. It means you are. It doesn't make sense to say that, but the meaning of it is understood. It's just part of our language. So this is kind of like that. This is like redneck speak turned into music, where we're using things that don't make much sense, but it's still just part of the vocabulary, and we're used to hearing it that way. So we kind of go with it. Here's what I'm talking about. So remember in that pattern, I showed you guys those thirds that were in there a lot. There's one, there's one, there's one right there, right? Well, in country playing, there's this really specific thing that we do with that third, where we love to get into it by using the minor third or flat third interval. So you can hear right there, that would just root, flat third, third, root. And as soon as you have that little lilt of minor third to major third, it sounds country right away. that thing right there. I was using that shape as well as another thing I'll show you here in a second. And as many times as I could, I tried to get you from the minor third to the major third. Now it's really important to notice that this mixed third approach that country players do, it's really only ever used ascending, going up, okay? What I'm saying is you rarely, if ever, hear country players going from major third down to minor third. Just because I'm saying use both kinds of thirds doesn't mean in any order that you want to. That doesn't sound country, right? You're gonna go up and down like that. But more often than not, you'll hear country players take it up, whether that be with a slide or a hammer-on, or even with a bend. You hear that kind of thing a lot in people's playing. That little thing right there is extremely crucial for that country sound. Mess with those thirds. So you could take a look at that pattern that we know right there, and you'll see on the chart I've also outlined where all of the minor thirds are. That way you can toy around with those as well and make your stuff sound more country than a chicken coop. So in addition to using that kind of dominant sound with the mixed thirds like we talked about a second ago over major chords, another thing that country players love doing is using just a good old-fashioned blues scale over those major or dominant type sounds. Now again, that doesn't technically make all that much sense considering that your chord is going to have a major third in it and your scale is going to have a minor third in it, as well as like flat five and stuff in there. Those are not things that really reek of major tonality right there. So it doesn't really make any sense, but again, it's just part of the language. And the interesting thing about it is too, is you'll find that whenever you're playing over those, you know, kind of country chord vamps and stuff like that, you can get away with playing all your typical bluesy licks and really abusing that flat five and stuff. And then at the end of whatever it is you're playing, if you end that with that little minor to major kind of lilt that we talked about, it's kind of like, oh, it was a country lick all along. If you didn't end it with that, it'd probably sound like a blues lick. But whenever you play all of your favorite bluesy things like this, and then play at the end, oh, well, now the whole thing just sounded like it was a redneck thing. But if you played this, that sounds like a blues lick. But if it ends with minor third to major third, now it sounds like redneck stuff. Again, to compare that to more like country grammar that we use here in the South, it's kind of like how everybody's meemaw can like talk the maddest shit and talk about how somebody's like dumb and ugly and useless and stuff. And then at the end they go, bless them, or bless their hearts. And it's just like, oh, meemaw. You know, it's like all is forgiven if you end it with that little thing that just sort of says, you know, bless them. I'm just kidding. This is kind of the musical equivalent of that. Play all the craziest blues licks that you like, and then end it with, and suddenly it just sounds like, oh, it was just a fun country lick. So we have our dominant arpeggio idea, the mixed thirds, as well as the blues scale, ending with that lift again, and you're automatically in country territory. Now what you got to understand though is that this isn't like rock soloing where you go, hey guys, what key are we in? Okay, I'll just play that minor pentatonic over all the chord changes. Country playing doesn't really work like that. We move these ideas as the chords move, you know? So if I was playing over A, I would do everything that I just did. And then if the chord changed to like a D, well again, my redneck ear is gonna interpret that as D7 instead, and we gotta move all the ideas to then centering around D. And then if the chord moved back to A, I'll be back to my A ideas. And then maybe there's a turnaround where it goes to E. I'm gonna be moving all those ideas to that E tonal center instead. Now, of course, there's smarter ways to do it than just these, you know, huge blocks like what I'm doing right now. But it's still a good starting point to get you playing some redneck stuff really fast. Thanks as always for watching. To get even more out of this video, plus a ton of other bonus content, be sure to check out that Patreon page over at patreon.com/Ben Eller Guitars. Sign up today. And also be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for new content coming at you every single week, and ring the bell for notifications. Thanks as always for watching. Now get away from the computer and go play some guitar. Less clicking, more picking.